Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I got a great episode lined up for you. Make sure that you are following and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the PAS Report website and share this episode with family and friends and on social media. Now, first things first, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. And I think this episode is fitting for Thanksgiving, given everything that we're witnessing. And the reason I think it's important is because while you are having Thanksgiving celebrations, you have a bunch of mindless zombies who scream and shout anti-Americanism as they bash the holiday, they bash America, they bash Western culture. And last week I asked where we went so wrong here in the United States. 2 weeks ago I published an article in Campus Reform, and I explained how our education system is largely responsible for the cultural rot that we are witnessing. And I have the link up at the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, so check it out. Or you could go to campusreform.org, either one, you could see the article. But the article is fitting because if you've been listening to this podcast for the past month, I've been harping on this idea of cultural rot that's ultimately going to destroy us. And I have another example for you because last week was really insane. A bunch of TikTok videos went viral as people, Americans, and mostly young Americans, they came out and proclaimed their sympathies for Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. That's right. This is how demented people are out there. This is how dumb we've become. You now have a whole bunch of people who are claiming that bin Laden is a hero and America's the one that's evil. Take a listen.
I just read Osama bin Laden's letter to America.
Osama bin Laden's letter to America.
Letter to America.
Letter to America.
Go read a letter to America.
Read it.
Go read a letter to America. Go read a letter to America.
Never look at life the same.
Blow your mind.
Everyone should read it. I read through all 8 pages. It's so well written and so reasonably structured.
I'm going through like an existential crisis right now.
Existential crisis.
This is the deranged lunacy that we have to deal with today. Now, some of you are going to push back on me and say, well, it's a fringe minority of people in the United States, and most people don't sympathize with bin Laden. To those people, I say, get your heads out of the sand. You can lie to yourself, you could pretend that this is a fringe minority, but while it may be a minority, it's not that small, and we really can't consider them fringe as this creeps in to our politics. You know, there's a lot of people out there that want to blame social media. They're blaming TikTok. They say if it wasn't for social media, these crazies wouldn't have a voice and there wouldn't be people like me amplifying their voices. But that's nonsense. Listen, I'm not a fan of social media. I think it's a cesspool. I think our society and human beings are, in general, worse off because of social media. And I am not a fan of TikTok, especially considering that TikTok is nothing more than a communist Chinese espionage and influence app, all right? So we got to state that. However, we cannot put all the blame on social media. We can't put the blame on the internet. Most of the blame can't be put on social media. There's plenty of people that use social media and they're not influenced by this crap. And when we see morons come out praising bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, that's not an indictment of social media. It's an indictment of our education system, which is an abject failure that produces undereducated, radicalized people who are unable to think critically and have been indoctrinated with this dangerous anti-American propaganda and instilled with disdain for Western culture. These are not your regular far-left loons pushing Marxism. These are morons that don't have a clue about much of anything. Just take a listen to this clip.
This morning I read Letter to America, which is Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. And I am ashamed to say that I not only have never read this letter, but I didn't even know this letter existed. It's wild, and everyone should read it. If you haven't read it yet, read it. However, be forewarned that this has left me very disillusioned, and I feel the same exact way I felt when I was deconstructing Christianity. I feel a little bit just confused, like I have entered into another timeline. What is this? And yeah, so go read it.
So I just read A Letter to America, and I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. Please read it. And if you have read it, let me know if you are also going through an existential crisis in this very moment. Because in the last 20 minutes, my entire viewpoint on the entire life I have believed and I have lived has changed. Please read that entire letter.
I need everyone to stop what they're doing right now and go read. It's literally 2 pages. Go read A Letter to America. And please come back here and just let me know what you think, because I feel like I'm going through like an existential crisis right now, and a lot of people are. So I just need someone else to be feeling this too.
I need you to stop what you're doing and go read A Letter to America. It is literally the craziest thing I've read in a while. And while I can't say that I'm that surprised, I am pretty shocked. So go read it and tell me what you think, because I really also need to talk to other people about this. And actually, before you even read the letter, I did want to mention, in reading the letter, I could only think of this tweet that I saw the other day. Under settler colonialism, any kind of resistance is branded as terrorist because the only acceptable violence is violence by the occupier.
Go read A Letter to America. Like, seriously, go read it. Type A Letter to America in Google or whatever you use, then come right back, because this makes a lot more sense. It explains so much, and I guarantee you it's going to blow your mind. And let's talk about it. So go read it, come back.
Now, I will guarantee you that if I asked them anything about bin Laden or al-Qaeda, they would be clueless. They wouldn't have any answers. But it's our education system that's fostering this ignorance, and we have let it go on for far too long. They don't even know what they're talking about. So in this episode, I want to give these morons a little education on al-Qaeda, but then, and more importantly, I want to talk about how we begin to dismantle this failing education system and rebuild it. And we have to rebuild it because the future of our nation depends on it. So I'm going to get into it all when we get back from this quick break, so everyone hang tight out there. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. Now, I want to give the fools out there a brief history of al-Qaeda because it's clear that so many have forgotten 9/11, the lead up to 9/11, and they were never educated on al-Qaeda in the first place, which, again, is an indictment on our entire education system, given that we were at war for 20 years, and we're still at war. It's not like al-Qaeda has given up. It's just that we've been able to limit their operational capabilities. You have to look at al-Qaeda. It was born out of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The idea that the CIA created Osama bin Laden, that was always a myth. The truth is the United States supported the Mujahideen. At the time, the Afghans were fighting our mortal enemy in the Soviets, and so it made sense to support this Mujahideen. No one clearly understood at the time the dangers of what laid ahead with arming and training these Islamists. And in hindsight, we certainly did make some mistakes. There's no denying that. But most are unaware that bin Laden was heavily influenced by Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, and Azzam was a firm believer in global jihad. Bin Laden was a student. Azzam incorporated militant interpretations of Islam in his teaching and edicts, and while Salafism, the sect of Islam, it originated in the 19th century, Azzam takes this concept of jihad to a new level by preaching violent jihad is a compulsory duty for every Muslim wherever they are and in any lands they are. And with Azzam's radical teachings, bin Laden, he would take what he learned and begin to build out his global terror network. Bin Laden was not a dumb man. He understood globalization. He understood the idea of power. It was something that consumed him, and he capitalized on Islamism gaining strength. Now, during the Soviet-Afghan War, bin Laden, he traveled to Afghanistan. He came from a wealthy, privileged family. He had top ties to Saudi leadership. And bin Laden's stock began to rise here. Here is someone who is highly educated, comes from this elite family fighting alongside other Arabs against the evil Soviet Empire. Now, Issam Daraz, he was an Egyptian documentary filmmaker. He began covering the war, and he quickly found himself covering bin Laden. He was fascinated by him. In one of his documentary films, he features bin Laden, and according to Daraz, the films quickly sold out. They began being distributed around Mosques for free, and these films actually can be attributed to inspiring Arab youth throughout the world, and it illustrates bin Laden's media savviness. It also marks the creation of al-Qaeda in 1988, which al-Qaeda translates into the base. Now, at the same time bin Laden's stock is rising, you have Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and part of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was jailed following the assassination of Anwar Sadat. He escaped, openly declared in Egyptian court, "We are Muslims who believe in our religion. We are trying to establish an Islamic state and an Islamic society." Now, sometime between 1985 and 1986, al-Zawahiri met bin Laden, and the link was formed. Bin Laden would be the leader, al-Zawahiri would be the spiritual leader, and these two organizations, they began to merge in the 90s. When we look at the formation of al-Qaeda, bin Laden's ambitions went beyond the Soviet-Afghan war. He laid the groundwork for a global jihad and began to develop relationships with other groups throughout the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And his hatred of the United States was actually solidified during the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Bin Laden, with his connections to the royal family because of who his father was, he went to the royal family and explained that his organization could revive the Mujahideen to take on Saddam's forces. Now, the Saudi government rejected his offer. They turned to the United States for help. The Saudis understood that they could not afford a long, protracted war. The lifeblood of Saudi Arabia's economy is oil. And while the war was going on, it would be impossible for Saudi Arabia to operate at peak capacity in the middle of a war. So they needed this to be taken care of quickly. However, this incensed bin Laden. He believed that the Saudi royal family betrayed Islam. They invited the non-believers, the infidels, to the holiest lands of Islam and established military bases. And that's where the war really begins between us and al-Qaeda. Throughout the 90s, bin Laden was growing al-Qaeda, creating other branches of al-Qaeda throughout the world. And the idiots from earlier, the sound clips that I played, they say al-Qaeda's hatred of the United States stems for our support for Israel. Well, if that's the case, why hasn't al-Qaeda ever really attacked Israel? Why haven't they done that? I mean, if this was all about Israel, you would think that al-Qaeda would have conducted a couple of attacks. But see, we don't produce deep thinkers anymore. And that's why they don't question anything. Instead, our education system produces unsophisticated people who are mindless bots. They think they're smart. They think they know more than everyone else, but they don't know a damn thing about the real world. They don't understand al-Qaeda. They don't understand that throughout the late 80s and 1990s, al-Qaeda conducted operations all over the world, killing thousands of innocent civilians, including Muslims, including those in the Arab world. They tried to assassinate leaders like President Clinton, Pope John Paul, King Abdullah of Jordan, Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, and so many more. And we ignored the severity and sheer determination of al-Qaeda. This culminated, obviously, in the attacks in 9/11, and it was to our detriment. The intelligence analysts, when we had real intel analysts that focused on these groups, as opposed to what we have now that target parents and traditional Catholics and Trump supporters, some of them did sound the alarm bells, but they were largely ignored. But what makes groups like al-Qaeda so dangerous is that many of its members, they're not rejects from society. They come from well-to-do families. They are well-educated. We're talking about doctors, lawyers, engineers. We're not talking about economically desperate people. We're not talking about people that have been abused and repressed by their governments. In fact, many of these people come from families that have direct ties to the highest levels of their governments. They're the elite within society. These were hardly your oppressed of society. And it's all about power and ideology. See, our policymakers failed to realize that these people were not crazed, fanatical cave dwellers. These are rational individuals who know exactly what they're doing. They view their tactics as legitimate. They believe people are just as complicit as their governments. They also understand the cost effectiveness of terrorism. It is a lot cheaper and feasible to buy box cutters and plane tickets than it is to buy tanks, fighter jets, and missiles. More importantly, they understand that terrorism is an effective tool against governments with superior militaries. They know that if they met our soldiers on the battlefield, it would be a one-day war. We would annihilate them. However, rather than fighting a conventional war, they exist in the shadows, blending in with the populations, making it so much more difficult. I mean, think about it logically. We were able to defeat fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, and Imperial Japan in 4 years. We've been at war with Al-Qaeda since 9/11, so you would say 22 years, but it actually began before that. Many of the people here just didn't know it, so you could say 3 decades at least. And when you look at its growth, when you look at its sophistication, you had Al-Qaeda in Iraq, began to take a more prominent role once we invaded in 2003. And Al-Qaeda in Iraq was started in 1998 under Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. They began the insurgency campaign in 2004. They challenged our poor strategy in Iraq. Finally, we began the surge strategy. We partnered with the Sunnis and had the Sunni awakening. And we crippled Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, driving its leadership on the ground, killing many of them. At the same time, you had Anwar al-Awlaki, a Yemeni-American imam. He began to assume leadership command of Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. His sermons inspired thousands, including the Fort Hood shooter Nidal Hassan. In 2010, you had the Arab Spring. And these terror organizations, they understand chaos. They know how to exploit instability. As the Arab Spring began to spread, we began to see a revival of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, or Al-Qaeda of the Levant, and it started to grow again. Now, once bin Laden was killed in 2011, it triggered a leadership dispute within Al-Qaeda. You had Ayman al-Zawahiri on one side. He was the expected successor. And then you had Anwar al-Awlaki, known for his charisma, his American ties, and he garnered significant support. So it was like a dispute that was going on as they were fighting amongst each other. Nobody was paying attention to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who declared in 2014 that his faction, Al-Qaeda of the Levant, had won the internal civil war and officially separated from Al-Qaeda, becoming the Islamic State, ISIS. Now, the good news is that we greatly reduced the operational capabilities of these groups. Every single person I mentioned is dead. But beware, don't sleep on these people. They are patient, and they only have to get it right once to cause massive devastation. Groups like Al-Qaeda, they want to reshape the Muslim world, and that's what the idiots in America don't see. They want to replace secular states and secular leaders with a single Islamic caliphate. The caliphate controls all political, economic, and social activity within a society, and they want to impose Islamic law on both Muslims and non-Muslims. They want to drive the West out of the Middle East, and their goal is one of conquest. We underestimate them at our peril. But again, you have so many people that went through a failed education system that don't know this. They think that, they could just walk into these societies and they could preach their B.A.S. Well, they'd get their heads chopped off if they did. Understand, Al-Qaeda and members within these groups, they're strategic thinkers, and it's much more than I could say for the leadership we have now. They want to overwhelm and stretch us thin. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they have a presence in over 50 countries. They understand that there is no way to defeat us militarily. To bring down the United States, they want to drive a wedge between our allies and destroy us economically. On the battlefield, we actually got an Al-Qaeda manual. Al-Qaeda General Saif al-Adel, he wrote a document, Al-Qaeda Strategy to the Year 2020. So obviously, it's a little bit dated, but if you understand the goals, you'll understand the sophistication behind it. It's estimated that the document was written either in the late 90s or early 2000s, possibly before 9/11. And in the document, the strategy lays out 5 stages. First is to provoke the United States and the West into invading a Muslim country by staging a massive attack or string of attacks on U.S. soil. Check. Then they incite local resistance to occupying forces. Well, they did a good job of that in Iraq, right? They did a good job in Afghanistan. Expand the conflict to neighboring countries and engage the United States and its allies in a long war of attrition. I would say over 20 years is a long war, right? Convert Al-Qaeda into an ideology and set of operating principles that can be loosely franchised in other countries without requiring direct command and control. And these franchises incite attacks against the United States, countries allied with the United States, until we begin to withdraw from the conflict. Finally, the last stage is the U.S. economy will finally collapse by the year 2020 under the strain of multiple engagements in numerous places. This will lead to a collapse in the worldwide economic system and lead to global political instability. This will lead to a global jihad led by Al-Qaeda, and a Wahhabi caliphate will then be installed across the world. So you look at that, and it's clear that they didn't succeed fully. but they have achieved some of those markers and they haven't given up. Then you look at our failed leadership. Between a $34 trillion debt, where we're spending $1 trillion in interest on to service that debt, between a failed education system that produces uneducated, radicalized individuals, well, guess what? Groups like Al-Qaeda, they don't have to do much. We're doing a great job of destroying ourselves here. And with that said, we're going to take a quick break because when I get back, I want to explain how we begin to dismantle and rebuild our education system to get rid of this anti-American cultural rot that we're witnessing. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Now, implementing simple reforms can reshape the educational landscape. We could actually produce an educated student body that will strengthen our nation. Imagine that. How crazy would that be? However, to do this, we have to immediately abolish this diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice agenda. DEI is a cancer. DEI discourages merit. It lowers standards, it erodes academic excellence, and they do it under the banner of equity. Just look at how many public schools have dismantled their honors and gifted programs nationwide in the name of equity. It's completely ridiculous. This is a toxic ideology that wrongly portrays America as inherently racist and oppressive. It promotes tribalism and a victimhood culture, and it undermines unity within the United States. It undermines this idea, the sense of nationhood within the United States. And I just want to give you an example. You have Charles Love. He sent his son to kindergarten, and he was supposed to receive exposure to STEM. Now, STEM should be an opportunity for learning. Instead, he was indoctrinated with narratives of how women and minorities like himself are marginalized victims. Now, this is in kindergarten, so it's coming in at the earliest of ages. STEM is important: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Whoever dominates in the STEM field is the superpower of the time. But instead of actually learning about STEM, he learned victimhood in kindergarten. Then you have colleges and universities, so it's not like it gets any better. You have them further embedding this cancer as they codify DEI into every degree program that exists. They make it part of their degree requirements. So we need a recalibration, and our curricula must prioritize critical thinking and a strong foundation in each of the core subjects. Students have to be instilled with reading and writing. They have to be instilled with a sense of civic duty. They have to understand our genuine history. Prior to the DEI agenda, it's amazing because they say, well, real history wasn't being taught. We whitewashed history. That's a bunch of nonsense. Prior to the DEI agenda, students learned about slavery, the Trail of Tears, Japanese internment camps. They learned about all these American atrocities. In fact, my students know more about these topics than they do about the Holocaust or the United States Constitution. What I advocate is that we teach them the totality of the American experience, both the good and the bad. More importantly, we celebrate our accomplishments. We can acknowledge our past wrongs. There's nothing wrong with that, but we celebrate our accomplishments and we instill the belief of American exceptionalism within the student body. We need to bring the education system back to the original intent. You know, James Madison, he understood that liberty is essential within a society, and he said that a diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. So we need a real education system. You have John Adams, who said children should be educated and instructed on the principles of freedom. Benjamin Rush, let our common people be compelled by law to give their children a good English education. This plan of general education alone will render the American Revolution a blessing to mankind. Noah Webster, every child in America should be acquainted with his own country. He should read books that furnish him with ideas that will be useful to him in life and practice. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. That's what they believed. They understood the importance of an American education system. Yet when we look at it now, instead we just keep dumbing down the system. So we have to raise expectation and standards. It is embarrassing that America ranks 25th in education in the world rankings. And as states like New York and Oregon begin to redefine and eliminate proficiency standards, the decline is going to accelerate. We just got a report, ACT, SATs, new historic lows after last year's historic lows. Our public schools, they produce a lower quality student body. Our global university rankings continue to decline because they've been lowering standards in response to the students' abilities and capabilities. But it doesn't have to be this way. You know, there's something called the Pygmalion effect. Higher expectations lead to superior outcomes. And a study from the University of Virginia and Rutgers University, it highlights that Teacher expectations were more powerful predictors of post-secondary education status. When those in charge no longer have faith in the student body, when those in charge don't believe the student body is capable, the solution is not to lower standards. The solution is to fire these officials and replace them with people who set higher expectations. You know, we have to reconsider how we approach education at all levels. And we also have to reconsider the funding. Right? You have Baltimore City schools spending over $21,000 per student, yet 40% of Baltimore schools can't produce a single student proficient in mathematics. In one high school, you have a student who was routinely cycled through to the next grade despite having a .13 GPA. And for years, Baltimore City schools, they've been plagued with mismanagement, bloated administrative cost fraud, wasteful spending, and we're talking millions of taxpayer dollars. How much money has gone into this anti-racism BS, this DEI BS? This is a clear example of why tax dollars should follow the student, and parents should be empowered. They should be empowered through school choice, which allows them to seek alternatives for their child's education when a school is failing. They could send their child to a neighboring public school district, to a private institution, but having this competition can break the cycle of failure. It could reduce academic achievement gaps, and it's going to help the most vulnerable within our society. It's not going to help the elite in society that already send their kids to private school. If the tax dollars follow the student, it helps the most vulnerable within our society. Now, at the collegiate level, you have institutions offering useless degree programs, promote anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Western culture. You have a bunch of ideologues in the college classrooms that would rather brainwash and indoctrinate as opposed to actually teach, get them to think for themselves, the students, get them to think critically, get them to problem solve, all skills that are necessary in the real world. We just got a report, a small business report, where 90% of small businesses believe that colleges are not preparing students for the workforce, are not preparing students for the real world. 42% stated that they would not hire someone with a 4-year degree. This is in line with what we're seeing from large corporations like corporate Walmart, IBM, Google, Tesla, Bank of America, all of which has moved away from 4-year college degrees. Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania moved away from 4-year degrees. So our colleges are destroying themselves through self-inflicted wounds because they're not really educating the students. So we have to look at what are we investing on? What's the cost versus benefit analysis? What's the reward coming from these educational institutions? And if you listen to those sound clips that I played earlier that produce students and young Americans that are sympathetic to bin Laden's message, well, is it worth that type of investment to the tune of over $1 trillion a year we spend on our education system from kindergarten all the way through college? So we have to do something. We need a review process of each college, each program, clear criteria. Tax dollars should not be used to produce ideological zealots who hate their own country. Sorry, I don't want to pay for that out of my taxes. If I'm going to pay for education, if my tax money is going towards education, it should only be used to enhance the quality of education, not ideological zealots. Now, for any nation to succeed, education has to be based on the pursuit of truth through facts and critical inquiry. We can only achieve this through a revamped system that's rooted in American principles and American values. Students have to be equipped with skills that actually mean something in the real world. So we're talking about practical skills, critical thinking abilities, problem-solving abilities, time management skills, interpersonal skills, and a little bit of common sense, right? Because we certainly have a void of common sense throughout our society. We have to stop the cultural rot, and we have to produce individuals that are going to strengthen our nation, not inhibit it. We need to produce individuals that display a love of country, and this can only be done if we revitalize our education system. With that being said, if you found this episode informative, please leave the P.A.S. report 5-star rating and take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it. Make sure that you share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. Visit the P.A.S. report website, pasreport.com. I want to thank you all for joining me, and I want to wish you and your families a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast. so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.